The Virginia Company sold investors a vision of paradise. Gold sprouting from the soil, fish vaulting into nets, and welcoming locals with free food. In autumn 1609, roughly 500 people believed some version of that pitch. By spring, only 60 were still breathing. The rest were in the mud, the river, or each other. Jamestown was supposed to be a money-making venture, but what the Virginia Company built instead was a death camp on a swamp. The colony landed in May 1607 with 104 English men and boys. They chose a marshy peninsula on the James River for military reasons. Deep water for ships, easy to defend. Everything else was a nightmare. Brackish water, mosquito-borne malaria, poor soil, and the Powhatan Confederation, who had not consented to any of this. Within months, dysentery, typhoid, and attacks from native groups began killing colonists. By year's end, more than half were dead. Supply ships kept arriving, but the colony wasn't stabilizing. It was being continuously refilled like a bathtub with the drain open. What they didn't know was that they had arrived during the worst drought in 770 years. A 7-year dry spell that turned the river increasingly salty. Modern research shows the water they drank was 3 times saltier than safe limits, plus contaminated with their own sewage and naturally occurring arsenic. They were poisoning themselves with every sip. Disease, dehydration, and malnutrition fed a vicious cycle, and all this was the baseline before the starving time began. The colony was socially doomed too. Most settlers were gentlemen, soldiers, and artisans, hardly any farmers. The Virginia Company's communal food system rewarded laziness. John Smith took charge with the rule, "He that will not work shall not eat," which kept more people alive, but many were already physically wrecked by malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies. What looked like laziness was often the visible collapse of starving, sick men. In 1609, the company sent a rescue fleet of 9 ships with 500 to 600 settlers and a new governor, Sir Thomas Gates. But a hurricane scattered the fleet. The flagship sea venture wrecked in Bermuda, stranding the leadership and most supplies. The remaining ships limped into Jamestown with 300 starving newcomers and almost no food. The colony lurched from feeding 200 to feeding 500 with nothing. Then John Smith was badly burned in a gunpowder accident and sailed to England. With him went the colony's spine. George Percy took command just as relations with the Powhatan collapsed. The English had spent years demanding corn during a drought that also starved the Powhatan. Skirmishes escalated. In November 1609, Powhatan warriors ambushed a party, tortured John Ratcliffe to death, and placed the fort under siege. Around 240 people were trapped inside James Fort with dwindling rations. They ate horses, dogs, cats, rats, snakes, then boiled shoe leather. Archaeological digs confirm heavy butchering of all these animals. Starvation broke bodies and minds. Edema, confusion, paranoia. People running naked crying, "We are starved." Those who ventured outside were killed. Cannibalism began. Multiple accounts describe digging up corpses and eating the dead. One man murdered his wife, salted her flesh, and ate her, except her head. For centuries, historians dismissed these stories as propaganda until 2012. Archaeologists found the partial skull of a 14-year-old girl, now called Jane, in a trash pit dated to that winter. Her bones bore clear butchering marks. Someone had experimentally cut into her forehead, then chopped the skull open and removed flesh from her face. She was processed for meat during the famine. The first scientific proof of survival cannibalism in a European colony. Of roughly 500 colonists that autumn, fewer than 1/5 survived. About 60 inside the fort, plus 30 at a downriver outpost. Meanwhile, the Bermuda castaways lived comfortably on wild hogs and turtles. In May 1610, they arrived with 2 new ships to find gaunt skeletons. Gates, seeing no food left, ordered the colony abandoned. They sailed downriver and met Lord de la Warre's incoming fleet with fresh supplies. Hours made the difference between a dead colony and a continuous one. De la Warre imposed military dictatorship. The colony survived but retaliated viciously. Percy led a raid, slaughtering a village, throwing children into the river and shooting them. That cycle of violence fed the Anglo-Powhatan Wars for decades. Tobacco eventually made the colony profitable, driving land seizure and the demand for indentured and enslaved labor. But between 1607 and 1625, of 6,000 settlers sent, 4,800 died, an 80% mortality rate. The starving time wasn't an aberration. It was the concentrated expression of catastrophic planning, poisoned water, ecological disaster, and a drought nobody understood. The fort still reeked of death when the survivors returned. And in the trash pits, a girl with no name and knife marks on her skull became the proof that the worst stories were true.